In 1969, the Reverend Maxwell's first wife was found dead in an automobile out here on Highway 22 just out of Alexander City. The lady he had married was later found dead in a wrecked car. Later, a nephew was found dead. Sure about that I'm doing this during my lunch break so that I'm not, and the reason I say that is I'm writing a book concerning this entire thing. Awesome. And my involvement with this entire matter is far more personal than you might realize too. In 1969, the Reverend Maxwell's first wife was found dead in an automobile out here on Highway 22 just out of Alexander City. It appeared that the car had been wrecked, but upon closer examination of the body, they discovered that she had been murdered, as a matter of fact. A next-door neighbor came forward and told the police that she had seen the Reverend Maxwell beating and choking his wife that afternoon, shortly before she was found in the car dead. At some point after that, the Reverend Maxwell, although he had been arrested for her murder, sued the insurance company because he had a fairly substantial life insurance policy on her to collect the insurance proceeds. At that time, I was a student in law school and working full-time for a company that did investigations for insurance companies. They asked me to interview Reverend Maxwell to basically evaluate him as a witness so that if they had to go to trial, how he would, come across to a jury. Reverend Maxwell readily agreed to the interview, and he was the most polite, most soft-spoken, most erudite individual I ever interviewed during the course of my time with that company. Very eloquent, very well-read, apparently, because his grammar and so forth were excellent. Always straight-backed, always had on a suit and tie every time I saw him. Well, one of the little quirks to this whole story, and keep in mind, by the way, that everybody's presumed innocent until proven guilty. Reverend Maxwell was charged with the murder of that wife based on the neighbor's, the lady next door's testimony or statements to the police. While Reverend Maxwell was awaiting trial, the lady next door's husband died. She remarried, and she married Reverend Maxwell. At that time in Alabama, a wife could not be made to testify against her husband under any circumstances. So the state's case went out the window, and he was found not guilty of the murder of that first wife. Sadly, the lady he had married was later found dead in a wrecked car. That the question was whether she died from the wreck itself, but they could never determine her cause of death. He had insurance on her also. Later, a nephew was found dead. He had insurance on that nephew. Cause of death was never determined. Reverend Maxwell had it was his wife's actually adopted niece who lived with the two of them. And he had an insurance policy on her, and she was found dead under a car as if she had been changing a tire and the car had fallen on her head. Medical examination showed that she was dead when she was put under the car, so it was really a clear-cut murder situation. The Reverend Maxwell appeared at her funeral at a chapel here in Alexander City, And I think he may have even given some sort of eulogy for the dead child, 15, 16-year-old girl. He had sat back down in a pew, and while he's sitting in the pew, her natural uncle stood up in front of him in the pew and shot the Reverend in the face and killed him, of course. Well, he was charged with murder, and Tom Young, as the district attorney, and myself as the assistant district attorney, prosecuted the case before a jury here in Tallapoosa County. They found him not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, on the basis that he'd heard all these stories about relatives that the Reverend Maxwell had killed, and the things that he had been able to do with that.
We moved into the house in January of 2012. We moved from Auburn, and it was just a good financial move for our family. It's cheaper in the country. We just thought it was great in the beginning. The very first thing I noticed, I got an uncomfortable feeling the first time I had seen it. Went up the stairs. Everything downstairs was great. Once I went upstairs, everything, the walls, the trim of the doors, the switch plates, the light switches, everything was painted this awful color blue. I was knitting. That's what I'd like to do in calm times, and my daughter was upstairs asleep, and I heard walking upstairs, just this heavy creaking, you could hear the footfalls, and I thought the same thing I thought before, someone's broken in the house. And so I grabbed that, and I got to get to my daughter, and so I go upstairs, I open her door, nobody's in there, and I thought at first I would just grab her and run out of the house. But if I had grabbed her, she would have started crying and screaming, and that would have alerted somebody in the house to me being up there. And so I decided to close her door. I had the needle in my hand. It was the room next to hers was where the noise was coming from. I threw open the door, and I came in there with the needle, and I was just going to stab. Just whoever it was, just stab them and hurt them, grab my daughter, and run. There was really nowhere for me to run because we were in the middle of nowhere. I was just going to get out of the house. And so as soon as I charged in the room, the sound stopped. And I checked in the closets, I checked under the beds, and there were French doors going out to that room. And the footlock, if you've ever seen a pair of French doors, the footlock was still latched. Nobody had come in there. And so I didn't know what to I was just kind of, I've got a pretty rational mind. I'm trying to think, what's going on here? I'm just trying to make sense of it all. And so I walked around. I was just sure that somebody had broken into the house. And so I just went from room to room, looking under beds and closets and bathrooms. And nobody was there. And so I started to think, I'm going crazy. Something's wrong with me. One of the last nights we spent in the house, I had something called what I think was sleep paralysis, where you're kind of asleep but you're kind of awake and you can't move. So I was just kind of, I was awake and I was looking around my room, but I couldn't move a muscle, and I could only move my eyes. And I saw this thing form in the corner of the room, and it came over, it jumped on the bed, and I could feel the weight of it on the bed. And it moved towards me, and then it jumped on my chest. And when it did that, this pressure, it was just so heavy, and I couldn't breathe. And so I wanted to scream, I wanted to move. If I could have just moved my fingers to tap my husband, I thought this, but I couldn't move anything. And so after it jumped off of me, it ran to the doorway of the hall, and I could start moving my fingers, and I was still seeing it, and I had reached over to try to get my husband, and when it turned back towards me and looked at me, and it didn't talk, but it let me know, like somehow communicated to me that it was going after my daughter. And then it took off, and I was moving my fingers and trying to wake up, and I could get the feeling back, and I sat up in bed, I turned the light on, and right about that time I heard my daughter screaming. And I ran down the hall, and I threw open the door, and she's standing up in her crib just screaming, and I didn't see anything else in there. So I grabbed her, I ran back to the bedroom. I'm checking her over for any kind of physical marks, and I told my husband, Hunter, we're not staying here anymore. I don't know what this is, and, I don't want to know what it is. And so a couple days after that, we were looking for a new place. My oldest son, he became afraid of mirrors, and not just mirrors, but any reflective surface. Like we had to take old socks and put it over doorknobs that would reflect, because he was scared to even see a reflection. And at night, we'd have to close the curtains so he wouldn't see any kind of reflection. And that lasted until we moved out of the house. And once we moved, he was not afraid of the reflective surfaces anymore, but there's still one mirror that he's afraid of that I have to keep in a closet, and it's that mirror that we had at Rockford. And the funny thing is, when we moved in, there were no mirrors in the house. Usually when you move in, there's a mirror in the bathroom that's mounted to the wall. That had been taken down. So there were no mirrors in the house. I had to put mirrors in the house.
Wow.
So that was another strange thing.
Yeah.
So, even to this day, I'll ask him, why were you afraid of mirrors? And he would never tell me, and he still won't tell me. He would just say, no mirrors at Mom's, but mirrors okay at Dad's. The rumor is that he would disappear people and cash in on the insurance money.
Yeah.
But he was never convicted of anything.
A lot of people believe that he was able to do voodoo. Well, one of the things now this one I confirmed is that at the Reverend Maxwell's funeral, there was difficulty. I don't think they were even able to find 6 guys who were willing to serve as pallbearers for his body. During the course of the service, the preacher who was preaching his funeral kept telling the audience that the Reverend Maxwell was going to come back to judge them. And in the course of his sermon, or whatever you would want to call it, eulogy, whatever you'd call it, there had been on each side of the podium these pedestals, the sort of fake marble pedestals that had flower pots sitting on top of them. And he was really laying it on the congregation very heavily that the Reverend Maxwell was coming back to judge them. And according to a witness who was there, one of those pedestals fell over and the flower pot burst open with a lot of sound, and a lot of the people almost left the church because of the noises of it. So, little things like the only witnesses I found who can substantiate anything connected with the voodoo aspect of it, it was a lady who said that he used to kill chickens and hang them around in his front yard, from the trees in his front yard. That he would drain chicken blood onto his doorsteps and those kinds of things. But now, other than that, there's no confirmation of any voodoo activity. It was rumors, and my understanding of voodoo is that the power of voodoo is based on the belief of the people who surround you. In other words, if you firmly believe that I'm capable of doing voodoo spells, then you will more likely be subject to those power suggestions, what it makes it. So, no, I never saw any powers or anything to reflect that he literally had voodoo powers or anything of that nature. But it was widely believed.
Yeah.
Of course, a lot of people also believed that when he was killed, that he had on, I think the rumor was 5 pairs of underwear and 2 bulletproof vests. He did have on several pairs of underwear, but he didn't have 2 bulletproof vests.